So I came up with a new type of challenge run that I haven't really seen before. I call it the Epic Challenge, or rather the 2P1C Challenge. Using an emulator, you set up multiple emulated controllers to one real controller, resulting in what's basically a double cherry for any game you want. So today, we're going to attempt to beat New Super Mario Bros. Wii with 2 players with just one controller. And yes, it's technically possible to do 3 players and even 4 players with just one controller, but we're just doing 2 players. Here are some ground rules to make the run worth attempting. Firstly, we can't just pick up one player and carry them around. It's possible, but doing this just ruins the whole point of setting this all up, so it's banned. It's okay if you accidentally pick up the other player, just throw them back down if it happens. Secondly, neither player is allowed to die. If we lose one of our players, we have to start the level over from the checkpoint. This means that we can't just shove a player in a bubble to play the game normally, because again that would defeat the purpose. Finally, you won't use warp cannons unless absolutely necessary, but other secret exits are fine. Alright, let's get started. Moving with 2 players at once is much more difficult than it sounds. Not only is it practically doubling your hitbox size, but there's also horrendous desync. When slopes and moving platforms get involved, the desync between players can become so huge that sharing input makes it impossible to ensure survival. Desync can also happen if the players are moving too fast. Sometimes they'll bounce off each other in midair and go flying into the void. In Super Mario 3D World, the game fixes this by having double cherry clones move at different speeds when they get far away. That's not a thing here. On the plus side, we now have easy access to the multiplayer ground pound. The MGP is basically a weaker power block, one that kills all grounded enemies but doesn't drop coins. Since both players share input, getting them to ground pound at the same time is basically a given. This makes clearing out levels like 5-4 a piece of cake. Let's look at an example of where stuff got dire. In 1-Castle, we have to move Mario and Luigi through a gauntlet of rotating cogs, and then survive a Thwomp Run section. The sloped surfaces of the cogs mean that Mario and Luigi will land at different times, and the turning aspect only separates them further. The shape of the gears makes desync especially detrimental, as you can get stuck on the walls or even wall jump with one of the players. You have to take it very slowly and try to focus on landing on the flat parts and jumping off immediately. Any desync carries over and makes the Thwomp Run a living hell. Since the thwomps fall when the front player gets near, the back player will often end up getting crushed. This means we often have to wait for each individual thwomp to fall, which gets especially annoying to do over and over after this dangerous cog section at the end. Thankfully, the boss fights are super free, since we can just MGP 3 times to knock them out. I wouldn't say World 2 exactly went smoothly, but there wasn't really anything special enough to talk about in the video. Every level has its fair share of fails, but only the worst of the worst are gonna make it into this video. Levels like 3-4 for instance. This level is usually as innocent as it gets, but the ice physics makes desyncs as common as ever. Especially when dealing with moving platforms, you need the players to be close together so you can land on and leave them at the same time. Dealing with flying enemies is even more annoying, as we can't MGP them, but killing them creates desyncs thanks to the moving platforms and airtime. It's okay to get the normal exit with the red blocks, but the secret exit that isn't very secret is just disgustingly hard. There's so much desync between the players that you'll often end up trying to control them individually, which doesn't work so well when they share controls. You won't believe the amount of times one of them got sniped by a fire bro. Then there's levels like 3-5, which are arguably even worse. At least in 3-4, there were ways to fix the desync by using the nearby blocks or walls. In 3-5, we're on a spinning mushroom with no walls. The best way to knock this level out is to time your jump so you always land when the platform is flat or uphill. With a good amount of focus, it's possible. There are a fair amount of levels in the run that I really want to talk about in the video, but they don't really have anything special that I can write about. So I'll do a little quick-fire subsection so we can go through some levels that gave me trouble, not hours of trouble. 5-1. 5-1 is the Stalking Piranha Plant level. It's overall not too hard, but dealing with the swinging vines is a pain in the neck to plan out. It was rough on my brain, but the method I used was using a full running jump to allow the back player to cross the gap and letting the front player grab the vine. Then we do a standing still jump to use the vine's right momentum to bring the other player up to speed. 5-3. The reason 5-3 was so annoying was due to the brambles and toxic logs. We have to move quick on the logs, which means there aren't really any opportunities to fix desync. 5-5. 5-5 is usually a super easy level, but again, desync is impossible to deal with. Due to the jumbo rays having a variety of different angles, it's very easy for players to be separated, and very unlikely for the jumbo rays to appear at distances which suit them. 6-1. 6-1 features what I'd describe as a queue system. Before the checkpoint, you're supposed to wait for Stone Spike to throw a stone ball, and then climb up and run past. With 2 players, you need to queue up by the climbing wall, which doesn't leave a lot of time for dodging. It's possible without, but maybe try extra hard to keep your item through the bullet hell that came before it. Back onto the more extreme side of things, we have 6-Fortress. After the checkpoint, there's this section with pipe cannons requiring us to crisscross between the sides of the tower. Issue is, 2 people can't enter a pipe cannon at once. This becomes a bit of a problem, as jumping toward the pipe with the second player results in the first player jumping back down to square one. I can't really explain what happened to my run because I got so unbelievably lucky, so I'm gonna edit together my livestream footage for you to see. Hands down hardest level so far in this run is 6-dash airship. Desync is not just likely, it's practically unavoidable. Why? Rotating, curved platforms. In an auto-scroller, we have to stay on these things. I can't even begin to explain how many times we just slid off these things or got so much desync to the point of no return. Shockingly enough, the run where we got it was probably the one with the most desync. Somehow we were able to separate them so they could be on separate airship gears without too much issue. Doesn't matter though, because the boss is the next big challenge. This is basically a game of bumper cars, but much harder. Bowser Jr. will constantly be separating Mario and Luigi such that they can't move left or right without hitting the electric fences. The whole fight is basically a game of chicken, which I somehow won on my first try. When we encountered everything else so far, my first thought was, oh, we'll be here for a while. In the case of 6-dash airship, it was an extremely long while, but in 8-dash airship, I legitimately thought the run was over. Why? The fight revolves around hitting bombs into Bowser Jr. with the ground pound, but apparently, performing a multiplayer ground pound will automatically break the bombs on the floor. Yeah. So at first, I was trying to find a way to desync the player's heights by the wall by jumping with one and mashing the jump button so they alternated. We also tried stacking the brothers, which sorta worked, but more often than not, the top one would just hit the bottom one and screw everything up. It was then we realized a way to get past the MGP issue. When Bowser Jr. drops the bomb, it bounces a very tiny amount before it starts rolling. If we time our ground pound just right, we can send it back up without it exploding. Thank God. It's normally around this time in the challenge run where I thank you all for watching and ask you to subscribe in the least intrusive way possible. Then I usually go on to say, oh, the final level's free, blah 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 blah. But not today. The final boss took me over 2 hours to beat across multiple Twitch streams. Let's talk about why it's so difficult. First phase is absolutely nothing, just MGP 3 times to knock him out. The second phase though? For some reason, the multiplayer camera just refuses to show you what's going on to the right, so there's a lot of waiting on platforms for Bowser to screw us over. Before getting to that point though, depending on how Bowser shoots down the walls depends on how much desync there will be. We can sometimes use the question block to resync, but that didn't always work out, and if we go too close together, we'll bounce off each other in midair and into the lava. While hitting the propeller blocks is a somewhat viable option, unless we're both still big from the first area, only one person will get the propeller, which means Desync City. And even if we are still big, it's extremely hard to get propellers as they fly in different directions and we move in the same direction. In addition to this, there are specific roadblocks within the final boss itself. Any platform that moves through a small corridor can be really hard to access, as we often have to slide down a wall to reach it. Doing this stacks us on top of each other, which just isn't helpful at all. There's this one bit where we're expected to wall jump, but we can't do that with 2 players at once, so we have to hope that Bowser shoots fire in a helpful way and that we can survive. Around an hour in, Brammy-san, second place in the world for New Super Mario Bros. Wii Any %, thought of a way to get the propeller suits. We positioned one player on top of the block and waited for the height desync using the moving platform. By ground pounding, we could jump immediately to collect the propeller with the grounded player, then jump to the right to give the other player the propeller. Doing this still came with its fair share of problems though. The level is not free by any stretch of the imagination when you use the propeller. It's easier, but not free. Desync can still also happen, which can lead to the players flying at different heights and different times while avoiding everything else on screen. But after hours and hours of grinding, we eventually made it to the end. And so did you. Since you made it this far, I'll assume you enjoyed it, which means you probably wouldn't mind gracing me with a subscription. There'll be more videos in this format to come, I can promise you that. Let's go to the outro.